I just finished reading a book called Descent into Death. Descent into Death. It's the story as told by Howard Storm, his near-death experience. When he was in France, touring all kinds of museums and places of art. He was an art professor at a university in America, and he was on vacation. He got deathly sick. He went to a hospital in France where he was supposed to die, but in waiting for way too long for surgeons, he had this experience that some friends of his showed up. He doesn't even remember who they might have been. They just came across as friends, and they kept talking to him. Come this way, come this way. And he could see his own body in the hospital, even while these other beings were calling to him, his friends, to come with them. And so he went to be with them. Now, one thing you should know is Howard Storm, even though he had a little Christian influence in his childhood, he forwent that and became an atheist in all of his adult life. And so he follows these supposed friends, and the farther they get from the hospital, the closer they get to something that's a little more dark, and these friends start to become more sarcastic. And eventually they become more mean, and eventually they become downright vicious, and they are demons taking him to the bowels of hell. And for whatever reason, he thinks of an old prayer and a few words from things like the Star-Spangled Banner and the Pledge of Allegiance and other things that refer to God, and he simply says the name Jesus. Oh, the demons did not like that, and they said, "Stop saying that. That's a word that's no good around here. Give it up." And they're really mean and nasty towards him, and he reasons to himself, if they don't like that name, it must be good. And so he says, "Jesus some more," and he calls out finally, "Jesus, save me." And eventually, to make a long story short, he ends up going to heaven, and the angels and Jesus himself, they talk to him, and they even let him interview them as he sees the paths of life that he has taken, being a wayward son, one that had fallen away. He's realizing Jesus is real. The angels are real. And all that he had foregone is true. He comes back. He re-enters his body, so to speak, and it takes him a long time to recover from this illness that he had. And over the course of months and even years, he struggles to share his story with his wife and with his friends and others around him. But finally, he is able to share it, and he's written this book, Descent into Death, by Howard Storm. He's not a Catholic author. He actually later became a minister, but he has a very Catholic-friendly way about him and how he describes things. And just one little thing he mentions is he had a student in his class before the near-death experience, and she became a religious nun, a sister. And he felt compelled, after this story, he felt compelled to call her up, find her, and tell her the story. And after telling her the story, he says to her something like, "I suppose you were a bit surprised by my story." And the sister says, "Yes, I am quite surprised, but not for the reason you might think." "What do you mean, sister?" "Well, I'm wondering why it took so long. I've been praying for you every day since I met you 13 years ago, and having my sisters join me in praying for your conversion. What took so long?" Isn't that something a sister would say? And so I share this story with you. Maybe it's a book you want to read, but also it's a journey of faith. Even atheism can be a journey of faith. And I hope most don't have to go into that extreme of a scenario before they realize Jesus is real. But you and I have journeys of faith too that maybe look different. And along the way we have to ask ourselves questions. Questions are the way that we come to know Jesus Christ more deeply. If we never ask the questions that our hearts have, how are we ever going to be open to the answers? And so we have to ask questions. And so as I look at the journey of faith in our gospel today, this road to Emmaus, 2 disciples who believed Jesus was a great prophet and was going to be the Messiah are so disheartened because he died, and now they're going home to Emmaus, I presume, and they're talking about it, and here comes the stranger. And they let the stranger join them, they talk about it, and then they listen to him, and they stop for supper, and he breaks the bread, and he has Mass with them. That's what he's doing. He has Mass with them, and they recognize him in the breaking of the bread, and they are so thrilled that when he even disappears, they cannot contain themselves. They have to run back to Jerusalem, almost 7 miles, in order to tell the other disciples what happened at supper. Wow. That should lead us in our own journey of faith to ask some questions. For instance, who do we hang out with? On their road to Emmaus, they hung out with Jesus. He was a stranger in their eyes. They didn't know who he was. I wonder how many strangers you and I have met who are being Jesus for us. But who do we hang out with? Who are the people we hang out with most? Is it our family? Is it friends from work? Is it some other club or work or group? Maybe we just sit around at the coffee shop. Who do we hang out with? That's a good question, because who we hang out with matters. Are they people who lead us in faith and walk with us in faith? Or do they distract us from God? Or are they something in between? Who do we hang out with? I have 5 questions. The second question is, what do we talk about? What do we talk about? Do we talk about the weather? Do we talk about farming? Do we talk about business? Do we talk about politics? Do we talk about our neighbors? Do we talk about our children? Do we talk about sports, hobbies, technology, coronavirus? What are we talking about? And do we ever talk about faith? Do we ever talk about our journey towards God? Do we ever talk about why we feel good about going to church, or maybe not so good? What are we talking about? What do we struggle with? As Jesus walked with them, they talked about what was going on in their life. And then the third question, who do we listen to? Who do we listen to? They listened to Jesus, the stranger. They wanted to hear more about how he interpreted the scriptures. Who do we listen to? Do we just listen to our parents or godparents or grandparents from years back, and we remember things that they said and we kind of start to live them? That's okay. Do we listen to the news and let that be what trains our way of thinking? Are we listening to our teachers, and our teachers teaching us things that are helpful or maybe not helpful? Are we listening to the scriptures? Are we opening up the scriptures? Are we hearing our own ministers or priests in the words that they share? Are we thinking about the homilies? Are we listening to what we've learned in faith formation, whether at the Center for Christ or from years gone past? Are we remembering and are we listening to the voice of God? Ultimately, where do we find the voice voice of God in our lives. Because I have no doubt that he is speaking to us. He is speaking to you. Sure, there are times when he is quiet and silent. But if you have the eyes of faith, if you have the ears of faith, you can hear God speak through your family or through your friends. You can hear God speak through the beautiful weather. Where are we listening to God? Who do we listen to? The fourth question, when do we stop and pray together? Like these disciples. Disciples always stop and pray. We are disciples. When do we stop and pray? Do we stop and pray every morning? Do we stop and pray every evening? Do we stop and pray at noon during lunch? And when do we stop and pray together with our families, with our communities of faith? Obviously, we would like to be praying together at Mass, but there are other opportunities as well. I was calling all the employees this last week, as many as I could, and after we would have our little conversation, just checking in with them, I'd ask them, what would you like me to pray for? How often do you ask that question of friends or neighbors? Is there something you'd like me to be praying for? Wow. And then on the phone, I prayed with them. I didn't just say I would do it later. For many of them, I was able to just say, hey, can we pray now? I know I missed one or two, and I ended up texting and saying, hey, what can I pray for? And then I prayed for them. But you get the idea. You get the idea. When do we stop and pray together? And then the fifth question I'm learning from this pericope of the Scriptures, where do we carry the message of Christ? Where do we bring the good news, the gospel? Where do we share our faith in Christ who has risen from the dead? Do we keep it to ourselves? Is that what Jesus wants? For him to be so loving and good to us and to bless us, and we never tell anybody about it? Is that what he wants? I think not. How many times does he tell his disciples, go out to all of the world and tell the good news. Baptize all nations and teach them my commandments. If once, it's a zillion times, Jesus is saying to us, don't be quiet anymore. Share my good news with your family and with your friends. And so we should ask the question, where do we share the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, with others? As you reflect on these 5 questions, and if you want to review those 5 questions, I've put them on our webpage, catholic-sc.org, on the home page there, the 5 questions. They might be a helpful way to review our lives and take note of what is God doing in our life. And so, what is your journey? What is your path? I pray none of you need to have a near-death experience. But if you do, I want to know about it. Tell me. I would like to hear about it. But we have that journey of faith. What is your journey? God has a journey with you and for you. He loves you. And whether you recognize him or not, he is walking with you. He might be a quiet stranger, but he knows you and he loves with you. You are a disciple of